This is the Canon R8. If you're wanting to get it set up for wildlife photography for stills and video, or at least how I set it up, well, this is the video for you. So let's talk about it. So we're going to set this camera up for dual back button focus. That's how I do it in the field with these cameras. We're going to have one button that's going to be for a single point that's going to go right to where we want it to focus to, any point we want to set it to. The second spot is we're going to set it for animal eye tracking, eye auto detect, where it's going to track it all over the field, and we hit the button, it's going to jump right to it. So let's get into those settings. First, we're going to the red menu, tab 1. We're going to change the image quality. So hit the select button here. So you can change this from RAW to C-RAW or off. I shoot RAW most of the time, so I get more out of DxO Pure RAW, but you can also set it to C-RAW to get a few more pictures out of your burst with your buffer size, basically. So I'm going to set this to RAW. The next thing I do is I'm going to change the JPEG and turn it off. I don't record any JPEGs. You can set this any way you want, but what I do is I do RAW and no JPEG. So we're going to hit OK. We're going to get out of this menu. So in tab 5, you can turn all of these off if you want to, and I usually do. So I'm going to set everything off. Why do I do that? Well, I turn all that off so I can do that in post. I want to control that how I want to control it instead of let the camera control it. So we're going to set everything to disable, and that's it. So you can leave it on by default, but what it is the camera is going to try to do the corrections for noise and things like that. I turn it off, and I do that through DxO Pure RAW or through Lightroom or Photoshop is what I do. On tab 6, this is where you can go down and do your raw burst mode. This is the 15 frames prior. You can enable it and go through that process. I have a whole video on the R7 about raw burst mode. Go watch that, and it'll talk about the setup, the pros and cons, and how well it works. I think it works really good. It's really situational. You can also do focus bracketing, multiple exposures. I don't do any of that stuff. I don't do macros or any landscape type stuff that I would use it for. Next thing we're going to change, we're going to go down to release shutter without card. Set this to off. What this is going to do is going to give you an alert. If you don't have a card in the camera, you try to hit the shutter. We want that to happen for sure. The next thing we're going to do is jump up to drive mode. And this is going to be how fast or how many frames per second we're going to shoot. So H plus is going to give you 40, H is going to give you 20, and low speed is going to give you 5. I shoot 20 or 40. I found that at 40 frames a second with the R6 Mark II and this camera, that if you're shooting an H+, use it when you've got something really fast happening. Otherwise, just shoot 20 frames a second, which will suffice for you. But I'm going to set it to H+ for right now, and you can change that back and forth in the field if you need to. Next, we're going to tab 8, and we're going down to image review. And the review durations, the back of the LCD screen, I want you to disable that, turn it off. The reason I turn that off is when I want to review the pictures, I'll hit the play button on the back. The other time, I don't want the camera popping up after I take a picture of the image. I want it to play when I want it to play. Next, we're going to jump to the AF menu, the purple menu. We're going to AF operation. Changes from one shot to servo, so it will continually track as you hit the button. Next, we're going to change the AF area. Remember we talked, we're going to have 2 buttons on the back of this camera. The primary focus method we want to have this thing set to is spot AF, and then we'll override that with animal detect other times. Next thing we're going to do is very, very, very important for the tracking on this camera to use spot focus and tell it to go where you want to go to. You have to turn this whole area tracking servo AF to off. We'll set a button later to turn that on and off if you need it. The reason that is if you have single point set on there, and you're always going to have a box tracking whatever it thinks is going to track at all times, but it's going to be a single square box. If you hit the button we're going to set later for the area tracking, then it'll give you a double box. But you're always going to have that single box tracking around. If you have this whole area tracking on and you hit your star button for your spot focus, it's going to jump to whatever it is detecting. We don't want that to happen, so we're turning that off. Now, we're going to move down to subject detect. We're going to change this to animals. Auto works fine, but I found, we're tracking animals. Let's just tell it to track animals to be a little bit quicker. Nothing else I change in here, but you can hit switch track subjects to 0, which means really sticky, to 2, which means change if you see something else. Not sticky as it's staying on, I mean sticky as switching subjects. It's really sticky regardless. Next, we're going to tab 2. This is where you set how you want something to be tracked as it's being auto-tracked through the frame. I leave mine to auto. Works great. Some people set theirs to 4 if they've got something very erratic. They'll set it to 2 if they've got something that goes behind trees or through trees. And some people will set theirs for 1, which is a multi-purpose setting, but it's a little trackier on things that are more erratic. But I found for me, auto works great. Tab 4. Since we don't have a joystick in this camera, you can set a section of the LCD screen on the back to be your tracking. And this is where you set that. You just enable it basically. And then you can tell it where you want it to go, you know, the top right, the bottom, wherever you want to move your finger on this to set that as a joystick on the back of the LCD screen. I don't use it, so I'm not going to mess with it, so we're going to step out of this. But that's how you change it if you want to set that up. And if you want another video on that, I can give you a video on that, but I'm not going to cover it right now. So in the blue menu, if you go to tab 3, go down to magnification, there's kind of a neat little trick here now. So when you hit the zoom button on your back of your LCD, this is where you can tell it automatically. Let's say you're having to pinch in more a lot of times, you can set it to 8 times magnification if you want to. I leave mine to 2, but this is a way you can go in there and set it to the actual size of the image, or you can zoom in and pinch in if you want to. If you don't have to do that, you can tell it's always open at 8 times magnification instead of 2 times. That's where you can set that. So now we're going to the wrench icon, the yellow menu, and we're going down to tab 2. We're going down to volume. This is how you can change the volume of your shutter sound. So if you want it louder, you can move it to 3. So you can move it to completely silent all the way up to the loudest setting that it is. I leave mine at the default to 2. I found that I can hear it pretty well, but most other people can't hear it, and the animals don't hear it as much. But this is how you can change the volume of your shutter if you want to. So now we're going to tab 3. We're going down to Screen Viewfinder Display. We're going to set this to Auto 2. And the reason we set that to Auto 2 is so it will switch between the EVF and the LCD back and forth. You have your face away from the EVF. You're going to see the LCD screen. You bring the EVF up to your eye. It's going to switch to the EVF back and forth automatically for you. So it's definitely where you set that. Next, we're going down to Viewfinder Brightness. And we're going to change from Auto to Manual. And I set this to 5. I always set it to 5. That way I get a brighter screen in the EVF and I can see things a lot better. Next thing we're going to is we're going to the orange menu and we're going to tab 3. This is a very important one. This is how we're going to set up our dual back button focus. So go down to Customize Buttons. The first thing we're going to change is the shutter button. We do not want it to start the autofocus when we have press it. The reason is, if we've got our single point sitting in the middle, because remember, our AF start is going to be what we set in the menu, the single point we set earlier. So what I don't want to happen is, I've got a bird to the right of the screen, it's locked onto the bird, the eye. I have pressed the shutter, change my focus from here to wherever my focus point is. I don't want that to happen. So we're going to disable the autofocus from the shutter button. So let's hit that and go over to metering start. So I'm going to do, doesn't matter if it's metering start because I shoot full manual, so the metering never happens. I'm controlling the metering through my aperture, my shutter, and my ISO. I control the metering. Next, we're going to go down to MFN button. This is how we're going to turn the whole area tracking on and off. So we're going to go down 1 from the default button, which is this one called Start, Stop, Whole Area AF Tracking. That's going to set this button here on the top. So if you hit this button, what it's going to do, the little tracking box you see around the bird, so sitting on the bird's head, it's got a single line. You hit that MFN button, it's going to go to a double line. So that's going to be subject tracking all over the whole area. And again, you only enable that if you want your single point to jump to that box, not where the single point's set. How would you use that? Why would I use it? The only time I turn that on if I have 2 ducks that are fairly close to me and it's not giving me the little arrows to say go from one duck to the next duck. So what'll happen, you'll get a box on one duck, it sees both ducks' heads and have an arrow say, do you want to go to that one or you go to this one? But if you hit the MFN button, the dual, get the double box, and you got the birds farther apart and that arrow is not happening, it will go to 1. You can move your focus point over closer to the other duck, your single point, and then it will grab that duck, and now you can hit the autofocus and it'll jump to it. That's why I use the MFN button myself. Almost never use it though. Anyway, so the next button we want to change is going to be the AF on button. We don't want this to be AF start. We want this one to be our eye tracking. So we're going to change this one down here to the one that says eye detection AF. You can also use AF on detected subject, but I found the eye detection AF for me works a little bit better. They're both fairly close to each other. And so that's what I set it to. So the next one we're going to change is our actual single point focus button, and that's going to be the star button. So let's select that one. We're going to change that one to metering and AF start. So now when we hit that button, what it's going to do, it's going to jump to wherever we got our focus point set to. We're going down to customize dials next. This one's very important for me also, and I'll show you how I have it set up. So the first dial on top, I leave it to the shutter. The next one down here, we have AV on the back dial. I change this one to ISO. And then the ring I will set to AV, aperture. So I'll explain to you how I use this. Since I shoot only manual and I want to control all three, the aperture, the shutter, and the ISO. The aperture is the least thing I ever change. Usually I set my aperture for my depth of field and I leave it. If I do need to change it, I can just move the control ring, or I can go to the back of the menu. If I don't have a lens of the control ring, I go in the back of the, hit the Q button, change the aperture really fast. My shutter speed, I'm going to control to what I want to stop or not stop the motion. So I know with different type of animals what I want my shutter speed to be, and if I notice it's wrong, I can change it. But I usually set that to what do you set it to? Ducks sitting on a pond, maybe fly 1600 to 2000, perfect. So I will have it sit at 1600 or 2000, I'll leave it. I'll leave those two alone. From there, I want to run my ISO. That's why I have it back here on the back by my thumb at all times so I can run that ISO. So as I look to the back of the EVF, I can see my histogram, and I can also see what the image looks like, and I can, if I've got my shutter set, my aperture set, all I gotta do is roll my ISO to get the exposure where I want it, either overexposed or underexposed, and I can do that as I'm shooting. So that's why I have those dials set the way they are. So now we're completely set up for stills. We've got dual back button focus. We can single point to a spot we want to do. We can also hit the AF on button, which is gonna grab the eye, the head, or the body at all times. So now let's jump to video. Very, very simple. So on the top button, you're going to change this from stills. On the left side, you're going to change that to video. Now make sure you're in manual, because if you're not in manual, the menus won't make sense as we go through this. All right, let's go back into the menu. We're going to the red tab. We're going to tab 1. So the first thing we're going to change is our frame rate, because when I set video for animals, I want to shoot slow-mo. So we're going to shoot 180 frames a second. How do we do that? We're going to go at a high frame rate. We're going to turn that on. We have to hit enable on it. So hit enable. Now you're going to go up to movie record size. We're going to hit that. We're going to change that for 120 frames a second, which is good. Well, all the other cameras have, but now we have 180 frames a second. And I'm enjoying shooting 180 frames a second. It really makes things slow down and really smooth. So let's set that at 180 frames a second. Now what we have at 1080p, 180 frames a second. The next thing that I do change at times is on tab 4. You can go down to Canon log settings. You can change this to C-log if you want to grade your footage. I'm going to leave it off for right now. I tend to go back and forth between grading and not grading. The Canon color science on video is really nice. You don't have to color grade, but if you want to shoot a little higher bit rate and get a lot more colors, then you want to start learning how to color grade. Next tab we're going to go to is 7. We're going down to tab 7. We're going to shutter button function for movies. Hit that. We're going to go down to fully press. We're going to change that to start, stop movie recording. So now after having that set, now we can hit the red button on top, or we can hit the shutter button to start movies when we're in movie mode. Next thing I'm going to change, I'm going down to zebra settings, and we're going to go down to zebra pattern 1. What that's going to do is when we're in video, when we're looking at the back of the screen, we're looking at the video, if we see anything blinking, we know we have clipped our highlights or our shadows. So if that happens, if you're clipping your highlights, bring your ISO down some more, or your shutter or something to compensate for, or vice versa for the shadows. Now we're going to the AF menu, the purple menu. We're going to set the autofocus settings for video. The only thing I change in this is subject detect. I change it to animals. That just makes it just a touch quicker than auto. Other than that, I don't change anything else for video. That's it for video for me. So that's all there is to set this camera up for stills and for video for wildlife photography, at least how I have it set up. You have a dual button back and focus to be a single point or to jump to a subject. And you also have set up for video to do 180 frames a second at 1080p to get those super slow, buttery movements of the birds flying in the sky and things like that. So I hope this video helped, and if it did and you're enjoying the channel, please like, subscribe, watch the video all the way through. That's the best way to help the channel. And until next time, guys, you stay safe and go run that shutter.